What's going on, everyone? So as I said yesterday, I'd be back today talking about the new tournaments and some of the meta breakdowns. Now, I have a list of the entire show up of the sector qualifier in Milan, courtesy of one of my patrons. They just dropped the full list of the decks being played, which was absolutely awesome. And also a little bit of a sneak peek into the day one of the Atlanta 6K that happened on Friday. Well, at least came to a conclusion for day one on Friday. Now, there is a lot of things to talk about. I also want to talk about a few of your comments from my previous video as we dive into it. But first, a big thank you to my patrons over on Patreon, guys. It's been a ton of fun. A lot of you are at some of these tournaments, and I cannot wait to hear all of your results. And I hope you all do fantastically. I also have a TCG player link in the description down below. Let's dive into the first thing, and we're going to spend a lot of time on this, which is just a breakdown of the sector qualifier in Milan. Absolutely insane breakdown. So with this sector qualifier, it looks like 550 decks were registered, and of them, as you can see, there is a massive chunk of them being Django fed with this little blob down here. 26.4% were Django fed, and more specifically, 145 decks submitted were Django fed. That is an incredible amount. Now, we're going to be talking about some of the actual results here in a moment. I don't have any of the Milan results yet, simply because the tournament is actually still happening as of recording this. But these are just the initial entries. As we talk about the Milan, not the Milan tournament, but the one in Atlanta, we're going to see some of the results. And, well, Django, Quinlan, Han, a lot of the decks that you are used to seeing, they performed as you might have expected. Now, the actual breakdown is quite interesting here, though, because we're seeing a lot of experimentation. If we compare this to set 2, when we saw Boba Fett being a very dominant force, the earlier tournaments had less of Boba Fett, and as we got on, we started to see a lot more dominant performance. Boba Fett green. And not only that, but also Boba Blue and Boba Red started to actually encroach into the meta. People were playing Triple Dark Raid, Boba Fett Red decks because of how powerful they truly were. This is something to really, really pay attention to, because I can absolutely see this happening with set 4 as we develop into the meta. If you look here, yes, we have 26.4% of Django, but what's actually really interesting is we also have 7.5% of decks, and this is basically the third and fourth most played, well, kind of tied, because the second most played was Quinlan at 12%, and we kind of expected that because Quinlan was a massively powerful deck from set 3 and did put up results. But the next one is Piet and Han 1. Han 1 at 7.5% of the meta, and Piet at 7.5% of the meta. I don't think this is super surprising. Han 1, I guess, is a little bit surprising. I would have expected Han 1 to really perform a lot more, or maybe not necessarily perform, but at least have a show up of a lot more decks somewhere around the Quinlan level. I expected Django to be the most played by a good margin. And then I would have expected Han 1, and then Quinlan, and some of these other lists that are just right up there. But seeing Piet as like number 3 most represented leader, tied with Han 1, it's pretty incredible. And this just kind of shows some experimentation happening. We saw this also with a lot of decks from set 2 and set 3, where people were trying to show up with the random leaders that are new in the meta and trying to do well. Another list that was really represented was Boba Fett, but set 4 Boba Fett, the new Boba Fett, the Triple Dark Raid, yellow, aggression, cunning combination with Triple Dark Raid, Devastators, similar to Django Fett, just because that combination is so powerful. Boba, on this case, is really going for the more aggressive indirect damage approach, whereas Django is all about racing, exhausting your units, and doing that nonsense. But seeing both Piet and Boba 4 really taking up a large portion of the meta is really interesting to see. Of course, as you start going further down, yes, there are some decks that are decently represented, like Sabine's at 5.5%. We have Palpatine at 4.4%, Cad Bane at 5.3%. But things that I was a little bit surprised to see is Kazuda's only at 1.3%. I think the people that were playing Sabine, probably some of them shifted over to Kazuda because it's a very similar style where it's very aggressive, trying to pump in a lot of damage. Different, I guess you could say, abilities and actions and win cons, but in terms of the overall strategy, pretty similar. We also see some other kind of minorly represented decks, at the 3 to 5 lists, 3 to 5 decks entered. Things like Asajj, things like Kira, things like Bossk, Vader 4, things like that. So overall, the basic meta is, hey, you see Jango, and you're going to see one of every 4 matchups is going to be Jango. That is a lot of Jango. And then you're going to see a ton of Quinlan, 1 in every 8-ish or so. Then you're going to see a ton of Piet and Boba 4. Right? Tons of it. Just absolutely massive, which is very surprising for a list that is brand new. Then you're going to see a lot of Sabine, and after that, and Palpatine. And after that, it's kind of like a mix. Oh, I guess Han 1 and Cad Bane are also spread in there as well. But after that, it's kind of just, here's a bunch of random 2, 3, 4 ofs, and you're going to fight up against those. Which, that isn't super surprising to me. That has been a consistent mainstay of Star Wars Unlimited. Just the fact that the game, although there are leaders that seem to be dominant, the game does offer a place for a lot of these lower tier decks to shine just because of the nature of Star Wars Unlimited. This action back and forth, the inability to hard counter a lot of strategies in most situations is just where a lot of these random leaders like Dooku could potentially show up, for example, or Poe Dameron or Obi-Wan, as we continuously see from previous sets and previous tournaments. Now, here's where the interest comes in, because so many of you have very polarizing opinions about Jango Fett, especially from my last video that I made, where I talked about Jango Fett and the potential to see Jango Fett may be on the chopping block coming up. The idea behind that is really comparing the previous representation of the previous ban announcement in Boba Fett to the current iteration of the meta. If you all remember, that Boba Fett post that FFG made, they explicitly stated that they were going to return to adjust the balance of the game, if necessary, and continuous review in March. So we are expected to see, if not in the next, few days here when coming up the end of March, at least within the next week, to see if we're going to see any balance changes, period. That is what FFG stated. This is not my opinion or a prediction or anything. That is just what they stated. If they come and do it, we'll see. There's no guarantee. That's just what they said, right? With that, I think it's reasonable to expect that they will follow up on what they said. And so with that, we need to determine, okay, if they're making a post, which they said they would, then what is going to come of that post? And I know a lot of people are like, oh, here we go, talking about bans again. It's not necessary, blah, blah, blah. It's not about whether it's necessary or not. It's about what FFG would do. Now, in terms of my opinion, I do think Jango is starting to enter this oppressive, a little bit more unfun territory. And one of the things that a lot of TCG ban for or balance for is competitive watchability. If you have a bunch of Jango Fetts running around and completely dominating and making each game very similar or in the same style, where each deck cannot compete because they're getting exhausted every turn, you're seeing a bunch of Jango mirrors. A lot of the times they'll just ban things just because of that. Whether it's the leader in this case or it's a card in the deck, that remains to be seen, but they will oftentimes balance just because the games are boring to watch or you're seeing too much of the same thing. That's just what it is. I think FFG is like that, especially since from set 2, now Boba Fett generally was around 40% of the decks entered and 55% of the wins. Jango isn't quite that level. So are they going to be banning Jango because of the absolute dominance that Boba Fett had, or compared to the absolute dominance that Boba Fett had? I don't think we're quite at that stage. I said the same thing about Han 1, where Han 1, at least double yellow Han, was about 19%, but if you took all the Han leader decks, it was 33-34%, which was getting close to Boba Fett. In this case, though, and this is where I think Jango does start to become a little bit of a question mark, is almost all of these are Jango Reds. They're predominantly, when we were looking at Boba Fett, it was not just Boba Fett Green. Like Boba Fett Red actually had a good representation. Boba Blue, same thing. And Boba Yellow. Like it was Boba Green and Boba Yellow, and they were pretty similar in terms of how many decks were representing them. So this just being mostly Jango Red is pretty incredible. And I do think that is going to pop up on FFG's radar to potentially address. But of course, at the end of the day, it does come to results, and we're going to be talking about that in just a moment. But a few of you have mentioned maybe targeting some of the cards within Jango Fett, such things as like banning DJ and Han. We should be banning Triple Dark Raid in Jango. And I do agree in that Triple Dark Raid is a major component as to why Jango Fett is so strong. Triple Dark Raid allows you to get that 2 resource discount on some things that oftentimes aren't able to be played when we come to the end of the game. What I mean by that is games usually end by turn 6, turn 5, turn 6. And if that's the case, well, you're not even able to get to Devastator type resources without Triple Dark Raid. But because of Triple Dark Raid, that gives you an immediate win con to end the game on turn 5. Because you have 6 resources, you get the 2 resource discount on Devastator, it comes down immediately ready, and you finish off the game. But it's not just that, but you also get the versatility of paying 4 resources to get a War Juggernaut and immediately tap down, essentially if you had Jango Fett, tap down their entire team, or just get down a War Juggernaut early, hit in for 9, kill a unit, whatever it is. You just have so much versatility because you not only get the option to reduce the cost of some of these oppressive cards in Jango Fett, but you also get the option of just having Triple Dark Raid in your hand gives you access to so much more because you're not pulling from your hand. It's not like a Now There Are Two of Them where you drop something from your hand. You actually get to pull from the top cards of your deck, which gives you a lot more versatility as well. And I do think this is a viable argument, right? Triple Dark Raid is too oppressive. It is super, super strong in Jango Fett. Yes, War Juggernaut's good. Yes, IG-2000 is good. Yes, Devastator's good. But the part of the reason why we're playing all these cards is because of Triple Dark Raid. So that is something to consider. But one of the things with this is banning the leader completely knocks it out of the pool, obviously, right? And it does limit some of the creativity, but banning a pivotal card like Triple Dark Raid knocks out multiple decks. And that's what I'm a little bit worried about with that type of line of questioning is like Jango, yes, Triple Dark Raid is a core card. Definitely, in my opinion, like #1 card in the deck. Like just straight up. Yes, Devastator's good. Yes, IG-2000 is good. Yes, War Juggernaut is good. But part of the reason why those cards are so good is because of Triple Dark Raid. I think Triple Dark Raid is the most powerful card in Jango Fett. I think a lot of people would agree. But if you look at like Boba 4, that whole deck functions around Triple Dark Raid as well, right? Some Cad Bane lists are using, now there are 2 of them, some of them are using Triple Dark Raid, right? A lot of decks, even Garth Saxon, we've seen, some of them are like Cunning Vigilance, and some of them are Double Vigilance. Some of those decks are using Triple Dark Raid. Dooku decks are using Triple Dark Raid oftentimes. A lot of Vader decks can sometimes be using Triple Dark Raid, like these Vader 4, right? Like Piet sometimes there's Piet yellows. Like not all of these are as dominantly focused as Jango Fett. I think Boba 4 is the most egregious example. But if you take out Triple Dark Raid, you take out Boba Fett, like pretty much. So these 2 decks drop. Now, how strong Boba 4 really is, we will have to see in terms of the results. But that is just something to consider with banning out Triple Dark Raid. I don't know if that's really what I prefer. Maybe restricting the combination. Like, okay, if you're playing Jango, you can only play 1 copy of Triple Dark Raid. Could be an interesting solution. Like, okay, you can only ban it for certain leaders. Maybe that's the way they want to go. I don't know. I don't even know if banning's really necessary yet. Again, I tend to steer on the sides of let's not ban things until we really see a lot more data. But it is a consideration that I think FFG will be making. This isn't about whether or not I agree or not, because I don't necessarily want to ban anything yet, because although I think Jango is oppressive, it is still a fun deck to play, and it is still, moving parts. It is a proactive deck. It does try to end the game quickly. It's not as harsh to watch as like a Bossk Blue, for example. And so all those things do have have it going for Jango. But I think FFG will be looking at this, and I do think they will be considering some options as to what to do about this going forward. But then we turn to the results as, well, whether or not you agree or banning or whatever, one of the things that FFG will be looking at is, hey, what are the results of everything going on in the tournaments right now? So this is kind of the results or some of the results from the Atlanta 6K. I know some people are like, well, it's not actually a 6K because there's multiple portions, at least in terms of like the pool one, as far as I understand, it is like that portion. So that is something to consider. But if you look at the top 8 finishes, we have Quinlan Voss with, well, at least in terms of this, no, the rank 1, right? We have Han 1, we have Cad Bane, we have 2 Jangos, we have another Cad Bane, we have a Major Vonreg, absolutely sweet to see, by the way, and then a Sabine Wren. So, of those, we have 2 Jangos, 2 Cad Banes, 1 Han 1, 1 Quinlan 1, and 1 Sabine 1, and 1 Vonreg. It's not that bad. It's actually not that bad. Like, that's a pretty reasonable split. Seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 unique archetypes, not archetypes, unique leaders in the top 8 is not too bad at all. That's something you should probably be hoping for. But as you start to go down, you'll start to see some of the tricky and troublesome things that we need to start considering. As we go past the top 8, we see Quinlan, Han, Jango, Han, Boba 2, fun, Quinlan. We've got Sabine, Jango, Han. It starts to become like, okay, Jango is really starting to become a problematic option. Ooh, there's Rebel Resource, by the way. We've got Sabine, Han, Quinlan, Obi, Sabine, Cad Bane. Lots of focuses around the top decks. By the way, I just want to give a quick shout out because I noticed this. I Am the Machine placed in 35th with his Han deck. Sweet. One of my patrons just thought I'd say something. Pretty sweet to see. But we're seeing a lot of Jangos. We're seeing a lot of Quinlans. We're seeing a lot of Sabines. We're seeing a lot of Cad Banes. And this is just kind of the US meta. Everything's different between different countries because people play different things. And this is just like early set. So Sabine usually does a lot more in the earlier set and then drops off, not like in terms of strength, it's still a strong deck, but in terms of what people are playing because they get to see what the meta is. And just based on this, we're seeing a lot of Jango and they're also putting up results. So here's where it gets a little bit tricky, right? Because we're seeing a ton of Jango, period, just a lot of it. We're seeing also a lot of Quinlan, a lot of Han too. Like these are the top decks, and Sabine and Cad Bane. But Jango is predominantly the one that we're seeing, and it's also putting up results. So we will have to see, because it is a very strong deck to contend with right now. And we haven't seen the full, top 8. We haven't seen the exact win percentage. We haven't seen any of that specific data, as that will develop as time goes on. But as we get more data, we're going to see a little bit of a glimpse as to potentially what FFG will be doing going forward. And I think this is really, really important. Really, really important. Because with a lot of these tournaments, this is what FFG is basing their decisions around. We literally saw that with the Boba Fett ban. They're like, hey guys, we took a look at the planetary qualifiers and we're seeing a little bit of something we don't like, right? And that's where we could see a little bit of a change. As of right now, if this continues onwards and we see, 5 unique decks or leaders with like Cad Bane, Han, Quinlan, Jango kind of sharing the spotlight, and we don't see this really dominant Jango force, I don't think there's going to be any change at all. I don't think this is bad at all. I think this right here is something that is pretty reasonable to see in any trading card game. And in fact, if you compare it to Magic the Gathering, it is way better right now because some of the tournaments in Magic the Gathering is kind of crazy. It's like completely dominant by a few different decks. Side note. So this is not anything to complain about in terms of competitive meta. It's also not something to be concerned about in terms of competitive meta. Again, for casual players, it could be completely different, but in terms of a competitive perspective, this is completely reasonable. Here's where I could see a little bit of worry going forward is if we start to see, okay, Jango, we're seeing a ton of Jango, we're seeing it perform really well, more people start to adapt the Jango, and we're seeing things like maybe Piet or Boba 4 not putting up results. Those players are no longer going to be playing those decks and are going to transition over to probably the more winning decks. And then we're going to see an even more dominant force, and that could push Jango into that Boba Fett territory, which is exactly what Boba Fett happened to have. It started off, yes, it was a dominant force, but then people started to see, oh, it really is the dominant force. I'm going to keep playing those. And they dropped more and more Boba Fett's in the meta. And then it really became a bigger and bigger issue. And that's what I absolutely could see Jango Fett happening. So we'll have to keep a lookout and keep monitoring some of these tournaments. And I'd love to hear more of your thoughts. I do think there are a lot of pieces involved, right? Like when I'm hearing comments about Triple Dark Raid and banning that, I think that's a reasonable position to take, but there's also some cons in that you might be banning out some other decks. But maybe Jango's just so dominant because of that card that you'd rather do that instead of banning Jango. Because if you ban Jango, then no one can play that leader. Yeah, they may be able to play Triple Dark Raid, but now you just cut out a whole leader, which might not be good either. Of course, the idea, I think, would be, or the goal would be to not ban anything, or maybe they'll go with some sort of restricted announcement where you can only play a single copy of a Triple Dark Raid in your deck, or maybe you can only play certain amounts of copies in a specific leader's deck, or you can't play this card in that specific leader's deck. I think that could get a little bit complicated, and I do think that FFG is thinking about all this stuff. And I am curious, very curious to see what they're going to come up with at the end of the day. Thanks for watching, everyone. Let me know what you think in the comments section down below. And I will see you all for a video